Testing, testing, testing. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Math Differentiation Simplified. My name is Susan Kochman, and you found me through the Math Spot. So tonight, I'm so thrilled to get to chat with you and talk about the best ways to help reach your math learners in your classroom. So let's jump in and get started. You are welcome to in the chat. If you are on the web page, you'll see the chat right on the side of the screen there. You're welcome to chat, ask questions along the way. And if you're having any trouble with the website, you can go ahead and click view through YouTube. There's a link on the screen for YouTube, and you can watch this directly on YouTube if that's a little bit easier for you. So tonight, I'm going to show you how you can easily differentiate your math lessons so that you're meeting the needs of your students in your classroom on a daily basis. Yes, even your most struggling math students. So you are in the right place tonight. You're in the right place tonight if you have students who you're concerned about. The daily instruction seems to be going over their head. They might be lacking engagement in your daily lessons. Or perhaps you have a scripted curriculum that you're working with, but you're frustrated because you constantly are feeling like it's not meeting the needs of each of the learners in your room. Or maybe each day after you teach your full group math lesson, you're constantly pulling the same group of students aside to the small group table. You feel like each day you're teaching the whole group and then you're teaching this same small group of learners again. Maybe you're using a whole group strategy in your classroom or guided math, but for whatever reason, when it comes to independent practice, you're having to pull this small side again and basically reteach them the lesson on a daily basis. If any of these feelings or scenarios resonate with you, I'm so glad for the clarity that you're about to gain over the course of the next hour. So, a little bit about myself before we get started here. I began my teaching career in a fourth grade integrated co-teach classroom as a special education teacher. I worked alongside the most fabulous gen ed teacher. She was a veteran teacher, and she cared as much about me and my success in that classroom as she did about our students. I feel so lucky to have worked alongside of her. But after 4 years in that setting, the opportunity presented itself to work in a multi-age special education classroom. So I did take advantage of that opportunity, and I moved to a third, fourth, and fifth grade integrated co-teach, or I'm sorry, not integrated co-teach, a third, fourth, and fifth grade multi-age 12-1-1 self-contained classroom. And I spent a few years in that setting. I learned a lot in that setting. And then another opportunity presented itself a few years later. So in that case, I had the opportunity to become a math interventionist, and I absolutely loved everything about that position. I loved working with small groups of students. I loved watching my students make big amounts of progress in short amounts of time. I loved working with teachers and teams of teachers. I loved that I had the opportunity to lead professional development. Everything about math intervention really just clicked with me. And so I stayed in math intervention for the next 4 years before my son Luke was born. And at that point, I decided to become a stay-at-home mama for now. I will be going back to school at some point once my kids are school age. I'll be headed back there because I absolutely love teaching. But for now, this is where I am. And opportunities like this workshop here allow me to continue with the professional development and some of the parts of teaching that I did absolutely love at the time. So here you see Luke, who is now 3 years old, and Isla, who is now 1 year old, and they are my day. That's who I'm spending my time with. And I just love every second of that as well. But let's get back to the math now that I've introduced myself. So I want you to picture this. Imagine how it would feel if you entered your daily math time feeling confident that each of your students was being met exactly where they are. So I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying that you're going to enter your daily math time confident that your students are going to meet the objective that's in your textbook, because your students aren't robots. They're not all going to learn at the same pace. They're not all going to achieve at exactly the same rate. What you need to feel confident in is your ability to meet your students exactly where they are as each of them enters your room each day. So that's what we're going to work on tonight. Step one along our way is going to be talking about a 3-step framework for building differentiated instruction. From there, we will talk about how to scaffold with the end in mind. If we're going to put supports in place for our students, we need to have a plan to ultimately take those supports away. I like to say that no one goes wandering through the halls of Target with a pile of base 10 blocks in their pocket, right? You're not going to have those manipulatives alongside to work through math problems on a daily basis. So if we're going to give our students a scaffold, that's great. That's fantastic. And I'm going to encourage you to do just that. But we also need to have a plan to ultimately take those supports away. And then our third stop tonight is going to be talking about what to do when differentiating your lesson alone is not enough. So there's going to be times when the differentiation strategy that we talk about tonight is going to absolutely hit the mark for your students, right? It's going to be exactly what you need. But you're going to have, it's likely that you're going to have a student or two, or even a small group of students who still aren't having the success that you would like to see for them just by differentiating alone. So we're going to talk about what to do when differentiating alone isn't, when that's not hitting the mark, when that's not supporting your students enough. All right, so step one on our journey is the 3-step differentiating framework. So the framework I'm going to introduce you to tonight, it's a differentiation strategy that works on building instructional sequences for your students. So it's likely in your teacher training along the way, whether that be pre-service training or professional development within your district. You've, I'm sure, talked about differentiation. And a lot of this talk hinges on differentiating the input of the lesson for your students, the supports you're putting in place for them, the output, what you're expecting from your students. You might be differentiating by assigning a different number of problems to different students, or maybe you're even being strategic and picking which problems you're assigning to students during independent work. That's fantastic. That's supportive of your students. That's not what we're talking about tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about differentiating based on instructional sequences. Understanding how to differentiate by building instructional sequences is an incredibly effective way to be sure your lesson will meet the needs of each of your learners. So let's take a look at this 3-step framework now. We're going to start in the concrete, move to representational models, and ultimately land in abstract. Now, you might have heard of this framework before, or this may feel completely new and different to you. In either case, you're fine. We're going to walk through it step by step. You may have heard of a similar framework called Concrete Pictorial Abstract, CPA. These are incredibly similar ideas. I tend to like representational more than the term pictorial because there are a lot of great models and diagrams in math that aren't necessarily pictures. So representational seems to be a better descriptor to me. But if you've heard of CPA or the Concrete Pictorial Abstract Framework, that's a similar idea. So what I'm going to do first tonight is talk you through this 3-step framework. Make sure that we are all grounded in what concrete, representational, and abstract mean. And then we'll talk about how to use this framework to differentiate instruction. So imagine you are introducing someone to the concept of an apple. Now, this is someone who has never experienced an apple before. They've never tasted an apple. They've never seen an apple. They've never even heard of an apple before. So the best way to support them, to help them understand what an apple is, would simply be to hand them an apple, right? In that way, they'd be able to see the apple, they'd be able to feel the apple, they'd be able to taste the apple, smell the apple. Someone who had never experienced an apple before would come away with a pretty clear and deep understanding of what an apple is if you give them an apple and allow them to experience it. So that's the concrete. Concrete is when we are using something that we can touch, feel, manipulate ourselves. Now, moving a little bit further down the line, we go to the representational. Now, again, imagine you're introducing someone to an apple. They've never experienced this before. So it would be supportive to teach them about an apple by using a representational model like a diagram or a picture that you see here, right? Someone looking at this would be able to understand the different parts of an apple. They would now have a concept of what an apple looks like. They would be able to understand that there's seeds and flesh and there's skin on the outside and leaves and a stem, etc. Now, are they going to have the same deep understanding of an apple as someone who literally was given an apple, was able to bite it, taste it, feel it, smell it? No. The representational model is not as supportive, but it is supportive to someone who's never experienced an apple before. If you give them this representational model, yeah, sure, it's going to be helpful to them. So we're going to move one step further down the framework to the abstract. Now, at the abstract level, we're not putting in place any sort of support for our student. So at the abstract level, that might be a sentence that said, I had an apple for lunch today. Now, if someone has never seen an apple before, has never experienced an apple, has no concept of what an apple is, this sentence is not going to be supportive in terms of teaching them and helping them to understand what an apple is. They might be able to infer that an apple is food because you said you were going to have it for lunch today, but they're not really very well supported in terms of their understanding of what an apple is. So we've talked about concrete, representational, and abstract in an apple context. Let's take it over to math and see what this might look like when we're talking about the teaching that you're doing with your students. So we'll start with a second grade place value example. Okay, and we're going to talk about what it means to work in the concrete, representational, and abstract realms when it comes to this example. Now, remember, I haven't quite gotten to differentiation yet, but we're just building our foundation right now, and the opportunities from differentiation are going to become apparent to you soon. So if we're in second grade place value, this might even be end of first grade. This is really end of first grade place value work if we're introducing two-digit numbers and understanding a two-digit number. So a concrete example or a concrete tool you could use with your students would be base 10 blocks. If you offer your students base 10 blocks, they're going to be able to touch, feel, manipulate, build the numbers that they're trying to understand. Now, is base 10 blocks the only tool you can use to teach this skill? No, of course not. There's many different tools, and the different tools you use would actually offer different levels of support to your students. But if you're teaching this skill at the concrete level, base 10 blocks would be an example of a tool you could use. So moving on to representational models, a place value drawing would be an example of a representational model. Now, your students aren't able to pick up the blocks. They're not able to move them and manipulate them, but looking at a picture is a supportive way of helping your students to understand a two-digit number. Your students can understand that 42 has 4 10s and 2 1s, either by looking at this picture or by using pencil and paper or a dry erase board and a marker to draw this for themselves. Is it as supportive as the concrete model that your students could build and manipulate? No, but it is still supportive of your students in general in helping them to understand that topic. Now, at the abstract level, we're talking about just numbers, just equations, just words. So I might say, I have 42 stickers in my notebook. Now, for a student that has no concept of what 42 is, they probably can't picture what 42 stickers looks like. They have no idea how many stickers that is. There's no support in that statement or just in the number alone that helps your students understand 42, as there was when we were working with the representational or the concrete models. So, when we're working in this concrete, representational, abstract realm, we're working in this 3-step framework. We have the most supportive, concrete, the supportive, not the most supportive, but the supportive representational models, and then abstract, which would be the least supportive when it comes to teaching a new skill to your students. So let's do one more example together, but this time we're going to talk about the model backwards. So what does it look like if your students are sitting in a classroom and you start at the abstract? So in this example, at the abstract level, we're asking our students to compare 1/4 and 1/8. So some of your students in your classroom are likely going to have a strategy to be able to do this. But if your students don't have a concept of how to compare these numbers, if they don't have a concept of how 1/4 and 1/8 relate to each other, this problem simply at the abstract level isn't something they're going to be able to access. So, what can we do to help our students access this problem? We can move one step down the line to a representational model. Now, representational can come in 2 different forms, right? Just as we have expressive language and receptive language, when it comes to representational models, we can have expressive, where our students are actually drawing this model themselves, or something that's more like receptive, where we give our students the picture or the model and we ask them to use that model to help them compare. Now, for some students, this right here is going to be exactly what they needed to compare 1/4 and 1/8. But for some of your students, this representational model still isn't going to have much meaning to them. So, what can we do if our students still need more support? We can move to the concrete level. Now, there's a whole array of concrete tools we could use with our students to introduce and teach fractions. You could use fraction bars, you could use fraction circles, you could use pattern blocks, you could use brownies, you could use, as pictured here, pizza. Okay. And if you're having your students build these models with a concrete manipulative, they're going to have more of an understanding of what those fractions mean. So imagine an activity where I start with a whole pizza or a picture of a pizza, and I've got a pair of scissors and I'm going to cut it. And I'm going to start by breaking that pizza into 4 equal pieces. And I'm going to ask my students to label each of the pieces. And then we're going to talk about what would have to happen to break that same pizza into 8 equal pieces. And so we'd continue with our scissors and we'd cut that pizza up further. And then I'm going to ask my students, which was the larger piece, 1/4 of a pizza or 1/8 of a pizza? And all of a sudden, for students who at the abstract level had no idea how to compare 1/4 and 1/8, this same concept brought to life all of a sudden makes a lot more sense to them. So, can you see the power in these different levels of support? Can you see that going into a math concept and just having in your back pocket, what does this look like at the concrete level, at the representational level, at the abstract level, would allow you to move more fluidly with your students based on their needs? So, in the comments right now, I want you to tell me what topic you're teaching tomorrow in math. Okay, just what are you teaching tomorrow in math? And then I want you to stop and think to yourself, what would it look like if I was teaching that topic at the concrete level? What would that look like at the representational level? What would that look like at the abstract level? Okay, now I will caution you. It can be very tempting to think of the CRA framework as a ladder. It can be extremely tempting to think of the CRA framework as a ladder. You think to yourself, I'm going to start at the concrete level, and then when my students are strong using hands-on materials, I'm going to move to the representational level. And then when they can do it with pictures and drawings, I'm going to move on to the abstract level, and then they will all be successful and we'll be ready to go. But I really want to caution you against thinking of this framework as a ladder, because here's what happens. If you take the concrete rung out of the ladder, your students then don't have any way to access the representational and the abstract. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, what do you mean? I'm not taking the rung out of the ladder. My students have had that experience. I'm just moving ahead. I want you to stop and think if this has ever happened to you. You've worked on a concept with a student or a group of students, and the next day you come back and you take away that hands-on material. And then in a conversation with a colleague, or maybe a reflection to yourself, you said, man, they were really, really strong when we were doing this with hands-on materials, right? My kids could add 3-digit numbers with regrouping together when we were using base 10 blocks. But the second I took that material away, it was like deer in the headlight. It was like they had never seen this concept before. Have you ever had that experience with a student? If you have, that means that you have an experience with CRA being thought of as a ladder. Your students were very strong with concrete materials, but the second they were taken away, that rung was taken out of the ladder and your students didn't know how to proceed. So, what can we do about that? I had told you that the second stop on our journey tonight would be how to scaffold with the end in mind. Remember, if we put a support in place for our students, we want to have a plan to ultimately be able to take that support away. I said at the beginning of our talk tonight that you will not walk through the aisles of Target as an adult with base 10 blocks in your pocket. We need to have a plan to take scaffolds away. So how do we do this? When you're using the CRA framework, you need to think of it as building a web, not climbing a ladder. Let me say that again. You're building a web, not climbing a ladder. But how do we do this? How do we build a web of concepts and understandings for our students rather than climbing a ladder where they are going to slip as soon as one rung is taken away? And the answer to that is linking. So if you take nothing else away from this workshop tonight, I want you to take away this word right here, along with the concept of concrete, representational, and abstract. When you're using the concrete, representational, and abstract framework together, you need to link the concrete, the representational, and the abstract so that when ultimately you take a support away, your students are still supported. Deep levels of understanding happen when we link the concrete, the representational, and the abstract together for our students. And now, I told you when you came tonight that this presentation or this workshop was called Math Differentiation Simplified. And we haven't talked about differentiation yet, so we are finally there. We can use this CRA framework and the idea of linking to differentiate for our students in a number of different ways. So the first way we can do this is by offering multiple points of entry into an activity. So imagine you are a first or second grade teacher and you are teaching your students about how to compare 2-digit numbers. Okay, and the lesson you're doing as a class, you are just pulling cards off of a deck to create 2 different 2-digit numbers, and then you're asking your students to compare those numbers. So we can support our students by offering multiple points of entry into this activity by having the comparison statement that we're comparing, right? So in this example that you see on the screen here, the students would be comparing 87 and 76. Now, asking your students to compare 87 and 76, that's the abstract level right there, right? And asking them to use a less than, greater than, or equal sign, that's the abstract level. So if you were to be doing this activity in your classroom and you have students who seem to be struggling, think about how you might take a step back. What would it look like to work with that activity at the representational level? So maybe the only thing you need to put in place for your students for them to access this instruction is to give them a whiteboard and a marker. Okay? And you say, we're going to compare 87 and 76. Now, before we compare those, I want you to draw a place value drawing that matches each of those numbers. Or I want you to put those numbers into a place value chart. Whatever it is, whatever the representational model that your students are currently working with, by just giving that one material to them, now you've differentiated the points of entry into this lesson for your students. Now, suppose you still have some students who are really struggling with this lesson, and what you can do for them is to move back one step further to the concrete level. You say, for some of you, I'm going to pass out base 10 blocks. And before we compare these two numbers, I want you to build both of them with base 10 blocks. So do you see how thinking CRA, by just having this continuum in your mind, can help you to quickly and easily differentiate your lesson? You really didn't have to do anything different to your lesson except for have a couple other materials that you could pass out here and there. Now, your students don't need to know who you're passing materials out to and why. That's not their business, right? They don't need to know that the students are maybe needing 3 different levels of support. You just present it to your students as, here's the activity we're doing today, and I'm going to give you some different jobs and roles in our classroom to do that activity. Some of you are going to have this tool, some of you are going to have this tool, and some of you are going to be asked to complete this task in this way, and then we'll all come back together and compare our results. Okay? It doesn't need to be a big to-do, a big thing. It's just offering the support to your students where they are. So another way we can use this concrete, representational, and abstract, this CRA framework to differentiate instruction is when it comes to our students' individual practice. Okay? So in this activity you see here, this would be for kindergartners or maybe first graders who are needing review on that kindergarten skill of understanding teen numbers. So students are given a number, in this case 13, and then a double 10 frame, and they were asked to build that number so that they can see that teen numbers are a 10 and some ones. And then on the recording form, they're going to record that number as in a number bond, breaking apart the 10 and the ones, and then also as an equation. So they're going to have 10 plus 3 equals 13 as their equation. So you can see in this individual practice, the concrete, the representational, and the abstract are all combined into one activity. So they have the concrete building with counters on the double 10 frame. They have the representational where they're working those numbers into number bonds. And then they have the numbers at the abstract level where they were just given the number 13 or where they're writing the addition equation to represent that number. So when it comes to individual practice, you could run this activity in multiple ways that would each be supportive of your students. You could give your students the activity as I've described it, where they are linking concrete and representational and abstract all together. Or maybe for some of your students, you don't offer them that hands-on material because it's not necessary for them. You say, I want you to use number bonds and equations to describe this 2-digit number. Or maybe for some of your students who are kind of on that cusp between concrete and representational, you say, I want you to start by taking this number and putting it into a number bond and writing an equation. But then I want you to build that number on the double 10 frame with the counters and see if you still agree with your answer. Okay, so you see this is one activity. I haven't changed the activity. All I've changed is which material I'm asking a student to use and perhaps the order that I'm asking them to use them in. So I want you to think about what you're teaching right now in your classroom. What's the activity that you're what's the activity that you're going to do tomorrow with your students to teach? And think to yourself, as my lesson stands right now, are we dominantly working in the concrete world, the representational world, the abstract world? And is there a small tweak I could make to that activity so that it's differentiated and it allows for my students to access it at different levels? Okay. Is there a concrete material I can bring in if I don't have one right now that might support the learners who need that? And if I'm working in the concrete and representational world, can I link this somehow to the abstract to sort of get my students ready for the day when we're going to take that scaffold away? So one final way you can use this CRA approach to differentiate would be in a small group activity. So perhaps in this small group activity, actually pictured on your screen here, I'll make it larger for just a second. In this activity, students are picking two different kid cards. And on the kid cards, it tells how old the child is. And the goal of this activity is for students to compare the ages to find the difference in age between two children. Okay. So it's just a find the difference activity. So in order to differentiate this activity, one thing you could do is assign your students to work in small groups. You could use small groups of 3. So in the activity, you have one student and their job is to use linking cubes to build the age of each student and compare to find the difference. And then the second child in the group, their job is to draw a tape diagram to compare the two students and their ages. And then the third student in the group, their job is to write an addition or subtraction equation, either a missing addend or a subtraction equation, to find the difference between these two numbers. So the students are going to work independently just for a minute at first, and then they're going to come together to share their answers. And they're going to see, do we agree or do we disagree with each other in terms of the answer that we came up with? And can we use the material to defend our response? So you see that you can have students who are working at different levels of understanding, all kind of coming together on a more even playing field, just because you supported each student with the material that would make most sense to them on this given day. So in each of these 3 different differentiation scenarios, we're ultimately doing the same thing. You're starting wherever your students are within the CRA continuum, and then you are linking to build their web. If they're at the concrete, you're linking to a representational model. If they're working within the representational model, you might be linking back to concrete to check their work. If your students are working at the representational level, you are linking to equations and numbers at the abstract level. And you might even be working on an activity that pulls all 3 of these levels, CRA, together at the same time. You're meeting students where they are, and you are linking so that ultimately you are in a position to take the scaffolds away. So this begs another question. What do I do when differentiation isn't enough? Because we all know we have a student or 2 or 3 for who differentiation, you're doing this on a daily basis, and yet they still have needs. They're still needing more support than you are offering in your tier 1 lessons. So what do we do when that's not enough? And how do we know when differentiation isn't enough? So if you have a student whose needs are not being met with the CRA approach, let me say that again. If you have a student whose needs are not being met by the CRA approach, if differentiation alone is not working for your student, it is very likely that your student has skill gaps that need to be addressed. Okay? So we're going to talk about exactly what this looks like with some examples in a minute. But differentiation alone will not work for your students if they have skill gaps that need to be addressed. Okay, let's talk about exactly what that means. So in this activity, students are starting with a certain number of fireflies in a jar, and then some of the fireflies are set free. Okay, so you can see there's 62 fireflies and you let 21 free. And you can see that the students have linking cubes to use to support them in that activity. But I want you to think about which foundational skills might impact your students' ability to access this activity. Okay. If you have students who couldn't build the number 62 with linking cubes, they're not going to be able to access this activity, even at the concrete level. If you have students who aren't able to count by tens, they're not going to be able to access this activity, even at the concrete level. If you have students who don't really know what subtraction means, They don't recognize when we say you let 21 fireflies free. They don't understand that that's the same as subtraction, as taking away, as finding the difference. That's a foundational skill that's going to impact your students' ability to access this activity even at the concrete level. So if you have students who at the concrete level are not accessing the activities that you are giving them, then you know there's a skill gap and you need to address it. Let's take another example. This is a third grade fractions example. This is third grade comparing fractions. And you can see in this activity, students have been given the abstract that 1/2 is greater than 1/3. They are also using a representational drawing of the fractions, and they also have hands-on pattern blocks to compare fractions together, right? So you've given your students the concrete, the representational, and the abstract, but who are your students who might still need more support? Who are your students who differentiation might not have been enough? It's your students who wouldn't know that those red blocks there each represent 1/2 of a whole. It's your students who aren't confidently labeling unit fractions. It's your students who don't understand that we're comparing fractions, with the same sized whole. Okay? Think to yourself that topic you're teaching tomorrow at the concrete level. Do you have any students with gaps that are extending beyond the concrete level, beyond the CRA framework? If that's the case, then you know that differentiation alone is not enough. If your students can't access your instruction, even at the concrete level, then you know differentiation alone is not enough. So then what's the next question is, what do we do about this? So let me tell you. I'll tell you exactly what we can do about this. You need to build a targeted small group intervention strategy into your math schedule. If you already have time for small group math in your schedule, hooray, congratulations, that's fantastic. But I know in so many cases, this isn't happening yet. There's not time necessarily built into your schedule for small group math intervention. Don't get hung up on this just yet. It's kind of a non-negotiable because if you have students who are lacking a foundational skill, and we're not committed to supporting our students in filling that foundational understanding, if that's not done now, then when will it be done? Right? It's critical that we help our students fill their foundational gaps because if we don't do it, then who will? So don't get hung up on the schedule just quite yet. I have some resources and I can help you find time in your schedule to build in small group math intervention. Just know that it is something that is absolutely necessary and critical. If you have students who can't access instruction, even at the concrete level, there are foundational skills that they are missing, and we need to do something to support them. So here's what we're going to do. Number one, we're going to create an intervention group based on a specific goal. So, for example, we're talking about first or second graders who are understanding two-digit numbers, right? So, if I had students who were trying to build the number 42 using base 10 blocks, and I had students that were struggling to do that even with base 10 blocks, then I know there's a foundational skill missing. So maybe is the skill that they aren't able to rotely count to 100 or even rotely count to 50? Is the skill that's missing that they aren't able to count by tens? Is the skill that's missing? I mean, it could be any number of things. So whatever specific skill it is that's missing, that's it. You're going to create an intervention group around that one specific skill. And that's going to become the goal of that group. Next, you're going to build a sequence of instruction based on the CRA framework. So you're going to think about what would it look like to do if you said the skill was counting by tens? What would it look like to do that at the concrete, representational, and abstract levels? And then you're going to layer on activities that boost your students' number sense and fact fluency along the way. Because I would hazard a guess that your students who are saying they can't access instruction, even at the concrete level. I would guess that you would say these are the same students who you would describe as lacking number sense, or saying things like, oh, they don't know their facts. It's really holding them back. It's the same students. The students with our skill gaps are the same students as we perceive as lacking number sense. It's the same students who struggle with fact fluency. So our intervention strategy needs to fill skill gaps, layer on number sense boosting activities, and also address fact fluency. So I want you to stop and think again for a second. Do you see how powerful it can be when you create both accessible, differentiated daily instruction and also intervene on targeted gaps in your students' understanding? When you take this two-prong approach to supporting your students and their needs, do you see how powerful this can be? It means on the daily basis, students are going to be supported through differentiated instruction, meaning you're offering materials at the concrete, representational, and abstract level so that you can meet each of your students exactly where they are. But when you notice that you have students who have gaps in their understanding, so they're not even able to understand instruction yet at the concrete level, you're taking the time to intervene and fill those skill gaps for your students. Do you see how using this two-pronged approach ensures that there's no students who are falling through the gaps? Daily, I have a plan. And when my plan is not supporting you daily, I have another plan to support you through targeted small group intervention. I want to tell you a quick story. You may have heard this story before if you follow along on Instagram, or if you're on the Math Spot newsletter. You may have heard this story, but I'll make it brief. So one of my very first days as a math interventionist, within the first few weeks of becoming a math interventionist, I was stopped in the school office by someone who had previously been a math interventionist. And they asked me how I was liking the position so far. And it wasn't someone I knew well. It's still not someone I know well, but I gave some sort of canned response like, oh, it's nice. It's really different than being in the self-contained classroom, but so far I like it. And if you're a math interventionist, you know that those first couple weeks of the school year are nothing like the rest of your year, right? Those first couple weeks, you are assessing students and creating a schedule and trying to work with teachers. I mean, it is nothing like the rest of your school year where you're actually working with students. But anyways, they asked how I was liking it. And I gave some sort of, oh, it's different, but I'm liking it so far. And then they shared with me the reason why why they decided to stop being a math interventionist, why they asked to be moved out of that position. And they said, year after year, I find myself working with the same students. So in second grade, we would identify the students who had need, and I would pick them up for intervention, and I would work with them all year long. And then third grade would come along, and we would identify the students in need of math intervention, and lo and behold, the same students would show up again. And in fourth grade, the same students would show up. And in fifth grade, the same students would show up. And I finally said, what is the point of this? Is math intervention even doing anything? Is this even a worthwhile use of time? If I'm seeing the same students year after year after year, what is the point? And so that's when I stopped right there. And I kind of had my own aha moment. And I thought to myself, you know what? I will know I'm successful as a math interventionist if my students no longer need math intervention. That needs to be the point of math intervention. It can't be to pre-teach something that's going to come up tomorrow in their classroom. The point of math intervention can't be just bringing them down and working in a small group. The point of math intervention can't be doing math and hoping that it's helpful for our students. The point of math intervention needs to be creating a scenario where our students no longer need math intervention, right? So that was a huge aha moment for me. And I'd love for you to kind of take that moment forward as well. If you are doing small group math in your classroom, the point of small group math can't be just doing small group math. It can't be pre-teaching what you're going to do tomorrow. The point of your small group math needs to be getting those students out of the constant need for small group math. The point of math intervention needs to be to intervene so that those students are able to be successful and they don't need intervention. So I want you to think about what your math strategy is going to look like the rest of this year. The way I see it, you kind of have two options on the table here. You can either implement that CRA strategy we discussed today to the best of your ability, and you will improve math outcomes for your students. If you just enter each day thinking, what is my concrete, representational, and abstract option in this lesson? If I see that I have students who need more support, where can I move just by offering a new material to support them? If you do that, you will improve math outcomes for your students. Or will you take things a step further? Will you also commit to a targeted intervention strategy so that rather than just putting those band-aids in place for your students on a daily basis, we can ultimately end the math intervention cycle and end the need for math intervention? So, I'm excited to share with you that open right now is Math Intervention Uncomplicated. Enrollment is open right now. This course will start next Monday, and it's a 4-week course all about how to provide targeted math intervention to our students so that ultimately we are filling their needs at the most basic levels so that they don't need math intervention moving forward. Math Intervention Uncomplicated is a clear and simple system for creating math interventions that work. So, coming out of this course, you would understand how to build math units that close skill gaps for your students. You would feel confident layering number sense boosting strategies on top of your math intervention instruction. So rather than just filling those skill gaps, you're also layering on number sense strategies so that your students' number sense improvement in their number sense understanding is improving as well. And then lastly, we talk about effortlessly building fact fluency without feeling overwhelmed. We find where there are opportunities to work fact fluency into those skill gaps your students already have. Ultimately, in this course, given a student with math needs, you will know where to start and how to build a plan that works with them. So, let's talk about what's included and kind of how this course works. So, we will work together through 4 weeks of instruction. Each week, you will learn a new topic. You will practice through the workbook and the videos, and then you will implement by planning instruction for the students who you're working with every day. So you'll have the opportunity to immediately implement what you are learning. As a side note, a huge pet peeve of mine in terms of going to professional development would be learning these wildly theoretical ideas and having a lack of direct connection to how will this look in the classroom tomorrow. So that is very much at the forefront of everything we do. We learn, we practice, and then we implement. How will this look in the classroom tomorrow with my students? So, in week 1 of the course, on Monday morning, you'll get an email that says Module 1 is up. And Module 1, the first week, is all about setting the course. So, at your leisure, you'd be able to go into the course platform and you'll find 5 or 6 short videos. I strive to keep the videos at or around 10 minutes so that you can watch the instruction when you have a little bit of time. I know that you don't have an hour or two to sit down and work on the course each week. So I give you these bite-sized videos. And in week 1, we're setting the course. So we're talking about the students you're working with. We do a little bit of mindset work. And we talk about where to start with our students, especially when you have students that feel like they need everything, right? You have that student in your class where you're telling me right now, you say, you know what? I know that concrete isn't enough. Differentiation isn't enough. They have these skill gaps, but you know what? They have so many skill gaps that I'm not quite sure where to start. That's what we're talking about in week 1, meeting our students where they are. In week 2, you'll get your email Module 2 is up. You'll be able to watch the videos at your leisure, work through your workbook at your leisure, and then your implementation, you'll be building an instructional roadmap. So we will dive way deeper than we did tonight in week 2 into that CRA framework. We will talk about how not all concrete materials are created equally. Not all representational models are created equally. And we'll talk about what might be more supportive or less supportive for your students and how you can flex between those models to help your students along the path to whatever skill gap you are filling. Now, at the end of week 2, there is a live Q&A session. So the questions you have through week 1 and week 2, you'll be filtering those questions to me, and we'll have a live Q&A session together after week 2 so that we can kind of take care of whatever it is you're wondering, any roadblocks you're running into up until that point of the course. So another thing in the course, each week or in each lesson, I'm constantly asking, what are you feeling confident about right now? What are you still wondering? And the purpose of these questions largely is to guide those live Q&A sessions and kind of massage the work and the instruction I'm giving you each week to tailor it to your specific needs. But every once in a while, some of those, what am I feeling confident about comments really stand out to me. So coming out of week 2 in the course, someone left the comment, one of the students left the comment, I feel confident that I will be able to develop an intervention plan for any math skill that my students are struggling with. And I'm so thrilled with a comment like that because that ultimately is the goal here. Given a student with needs, I want you to say, I feel confident that I could help a student to address that specific need. So a comment like that was just music to my ears. Now, moving into week 3 of the course, we talk about layering on number sense. So your learning and your practicing are going to be all about understanding number sense, number relationships. What is number sense? How do I build this in my students? And then your implementation that week will be all about how can I layer number sense on top of that roadmap I created in week 2. So now we're not only filling in skill gaps, but we are also boosting our students' number sense and flexibility along the way. Coming out of week 3 of the course, I got another one of those comments that just made me so happy. He said, why was this course not offered at a pre-service teacher training prior to me getting my teaching license? And I feel similarly. I mean, going into my first year as a math intervention teacher, I didn't have this. I was wrestling with, am I filling skill gaps? Am I supposed to be building number sense in my students? Is this a fact fluency intervention? There's such a large scope of what I could be supporting my students with. It just all felt too big and like too much. And that's the point of this course, is just to uncomplicate things, to simplify what you're doing for your students. Now, in week 4 of the course, we focus on fact fluency. So when I ran this course this summer, it was focused only on addition and subtraction, but this fall, I'm pleased to bring you addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. We've kind of widened the scope of this course a bit for our intermediate teachers. So we're going to talk about how students acquire facts, and we're going to talk a lot about fact relationships so that you will see the opportunities for teaching fact fluency within your other instruction, within the instruction that you already are providing to your students. Coming out of week 4 of instruction, I got another one of those comments. A teacher said, I'm feeling really clear on how to help students commit facts to memory using this method. When was the last time you said to yourself, when it comes to fact fluency, I just feel really clear and really confident about how to help my students develop fact fluency? If that's not a feeling you've had, this course can help you with that, especially in week 4. So if this 4-week course is something that you are ready to enroll in, you can go right now to k5mathspot.com/enroll and we'll get you set up. You will be onboarded so that next Monday when we start, you are there and ready to go. Now, there's the course, and then there's also a few bonus pieces that I put in place just to make the course more accessible, easier for you to use and to implement. So first off, we have 8 weeks of live support in a Facebook group. So we will have a Facebook group where each of the members of the course, each of the students of the course can come together and work. Now, each week you'll see a question thread so that in those live Q&A sessions, and there's another live Q&A session closer to the end of the course, you can submit your questions and you can either talk to one another during the course or I can address those questions at a live Q&A. Now, I know I see a couple alumni with us tonight. If you are an alumni, keep an eye open to your email. I'm going to give you a chance to get back into the Facebook group if you are interested in kind of going through the course again. And for my alumni, there will be no additional charge. You'll just be put back into the group if you are interested in doing that. So keep an eye on your email box. Bonus number 2 is a print and plug lesson makeover kit. This is just a simple to use template. If you already have a curriculum that you're using, lesson plans that you've created in the past, and you're feeling like, oh, I don't want to recreate the wheel when it comes to everything that I'm doing and whatever I'm teaching, this print and plug lesson makeover kit is for you. It just allows you to look at the lessons you're teaching and kind of put the lens of math intervention uncomplicated on top of those lessons. The template is really just a brainstorming activity to help you put that lens on your instruction so you're not recreating the wheel. Now, bonus number 3 is an intervention planning workbook. This is an incredibly detailed workbook that gives you a look into kind of the behind the scenes of how I planned my math intervention instruction. So it walks you through planning out your year at a glance, and then what you're looking at a monthly level and even weekly and daily, what kind of notes you can be taking about your students and making instructional decisions. As soon as you enroll in the course, this intervention planning workbook bonus will be immediately available to you. So that's generally it, although stay because it's not. So what's included again, a quick recap. We've got the 4-week course. I will keep the Facebook group for the course open for 8 weeks so that if you do tend to fall behind or you're in a busy season of your life, you can kind of work at your own pace. You'll get the print and plug lesson makeover kit and then also the intervention planning workbook. Now, I do have one more bonus for you. However, this is only available to those who enroll while we are here on this workshop, because I can't let the number of people in this offer balloon too large. So if you enroll while we're still on right now, on Fridays, you will have access to Voxer office hours. So if you're not familiar with the Voxer app, it's basically a messaging app, but rather than texting, it's audio. So on Fridays, you would be able to send me Voxer messages either about the course, the content in the course, or even how your implementation is going. So send me a message that says, I was working on this, I tried this strategy with my student, and I still need a little more support. And then I'll be able to send audio messages back to you as well. So again, if you enroll while we are on this workshop tonight still, you will have access to live Voxer office hours every Friday within those first 4 weeks of the course. So ultimately, I have for you the 4-week course, the 8-week Facebook group so you can work at your own pace, the lesson print and plug lesson makeover kit, the intervention planning workbook, and the planning workbook you'll get access to immediately as soon as you enroll. And if you enroll while we are on this workshop together tonight, you will also have Voxer office hours each Friday for those first 4 weeks of the course. So all bonuses included, the course still, the price point is $97. So one more of those comments from my students throughout the course. At the very end of the course, one of my students submitted this. They said, I'm feeling much more confident about supporting struggling math learners this year. I feel that this course has given me more tools to help those students. And like I said, that's ultimately my entire goal for you. Given a student with math needs, I want you to feel confident that you will be able to support that student in their learning. So again, if you're ready to enroll, it's k5mathspot.com/enroll. Or if you're watching right from the webpage, there should be buttons and links that bring you to that page. So if you do have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat. Otherwise, I do have a few of the questions I receive most often in my email box, and I'll just go through those quickly in case it's something you might be wondering. So first, what is the time commitment required for this course? Like I said, each week you'll receive a new module. We'll have one topic for each week. And within that module, you will have lesson videos. The lesson videos, I try to keep them right around 10 minutes, and there might be 5 or 6 videos each week. So each week you probably have an hour of learning time, maybe 20 minutes of practice time, and then your implementation time is really your math planning. So you might have another 40 minutes of implementation time. You might spend more, you might spend less. It's depending on the instruction you're delivering in your classroom at that point in time. So if I was to give you a ballpark, I'd say 2 hours or less each week, but it's definitely broken into bite-sized pieces. Will this course work if I have a curriculum I'm required to follow? Yes, absolutely. The point is not to say, here's a topic you're teaching and here's how you're going to teach it in order. That's not what this course is. So we're not trying to take the place of your curriculum. This course is instruction on how students learn math, how they gain new skills, how they build their number sense, how facts are acquired. So you'll be able to put this lens and this understanding on top of whatever curriculum or whatever lessons you're using. You might be wondering, I teach, insert your grade level here. Will this work for me? This course will be best suited to teachers in 1st through 4th grade. The only reason I don't say 5th grade is because the majority of the examples in the course don't go deeply into fraction operations and decimal operations. We generally tend towards whole numbers and addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So if you have students you're supporting in the areas of whole numbers and place value, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, then you will be in exactly the right spot. So I see that it is 9:01. I'm going to let you go, but I cannot wait to get started next week. Go ahead to k5mathspot.com/enroll to join me for Math Intervention Uncomplicated. And thank you so much for joining me here tonight. Have a good one.